What if the narrative we tell about our ascent, from hunter-gatherers to city builders, isn't the whole story? What if our past isn't a straight line of progress, but a cycle of peaks and valleys so profound that entire civilizations, some possibly as or more advanced than our own, have simply vanished from the pages of time? The question that will guide us on this journey is not whether history could have been reset, but whether we are living in just one of its many chapters, blind to the silent ruins of worlds that came before. Worlds whose stars were the same ones we gaze upon tonight, but whose stories dissolved like salt in water, leaving behind an ocean of time from which we have only just begun to taste the surface. The journey to explore these profound questions is the essence of what we do here. If you enjoy following these clues hidden in the fabric of time and feel drawn to the beauty of great mysteries, consider subscribing to continue this exploration with us. Our official history seems so solid, a paved road that begins with fire and flaked stone, advances to agriculture, and culminates in us at the pinnacle of our technological knowledge. But this solidity is an illusion. Beneath our feet, the geological layers hold a deep silence, a void that spans hundreds of thousands of years. Is this silence truly empty, or is it just the sound of an entire library that has burned down, with only a few charred fragments reaching us? Imagine time as an infinite ocean. Our recorded history is a tiny island, formed in the last moments of human existence. We believe the rest of the ocean was always empty, that we were the first to build a boat to sail it. But what if this ocean is filled with submerged islands, cities, cultures, and knowledge that once saw the sun but were swallowed by a relentless tide of ice ages, comet impacts, or simply the slow, grinding erosion of forgetting? The arrogance of seeing ourselves as the final point of a long journey prevents us from considering the humbler possibility that we are merely the latest wave to reach the shore, ignorant of the tides that came before. The Earth is an expert in recycling. It does not preserve, it transforms. Mountains turn to dust, coastlines retreat and advance, and jungles consume stone with a green and silent hunger. Our cities of steel and glass, which seem so permanent to us, are, on a geological scale, sandcastles. In 100,000 years, nearly all traces of our existence would be pulverized, dissolved, and buried under new layers of sediment. A future archaeologist of a distant species could dig for millennia and find only a thin layer of fossilized plastics and radioactive isotopes, an inexplicable anomaly amidst the rocks. Would they know who we were, what we dreamed, or what we built? Or would we be just another enigma, another what if? Our narrative of continuous progress is comforting. It gives us a sense of purpose and destiny, a feeling that we are always moving forward toward a better and wiser future. But nature does not move in a straight line. It moves in cycles, the seasons, the tides, life and death. Why would human civilization be the only exception to this universal rule? The idea that other forms of humanity, other peaks of knowledge, may have existed and vanished, forces us to confront our own fragility, not as individuals, but as a species, as a collective memory. Perhaps progress is not a ladder, but a wheel that turns slowly over the ages. History, as we know it, is written by the survivors. But what if there were cataclysms so great that they left no survivors to tell the tale? Events that not only toppled empires, but rebooted the planet's operating system itself, forcing the few remnants back to a fundamental state of existence, carrying only fragments of ancient knowledge in their memories. These fragments, distorted by time, could have become our oldest myths, stories of a golden age, of gods who walked among men, of a great flood that washed the world clean. Are they just stories, or are they the echoes of a lost world? What defines us as advanced? Is it our digital technology, our ability to travel through space, our weapons of mass destruction? Perhaps a prior civilization had a different definition. Perhaps their advancement was based on a deeper understanding of consciousness, of biology, or of the subtle energies of the planet itself. Such a civilization, perhaps with a minimal ecological footprint, would not leave behind the same kinds of traces that we will. Their ruins would not be of concrete and steel, but perhaps of knowledge encoded in nature itself, in the astronomical alignments of stone structures, or in ancestral wisdom that we now dismiss as primitive folklore. As the night deepens and the world around us stills, allow this question to settle in your mind, not as a conspiracy theory, but as an exercise in humility and imagination. Look up at the night sky, the same sky that countless generations have looked upon before us. How many of them asked themselves the same questions? How many of them found answers that are now lost forever? Are we truly at the peak of the human journey? Or are we simply the most recent to awaken from a long slumber with a vague sense that we have dreamed this dream before many, many times? This nocturnal journey is not about finding definitive answers, but about learning to live with the questions in a more profound way. It is about embracing the mystery of our own past and acknowledging that the book of human history may be far longer, more complex, and stranger than we have ever imagined. What we are about to explore are the clues, the anomalies, and the hypotheses that invite us to rewrite not only our past, but our very identity. Are we ready to listen to the whispers that come from the depths of time, the echoes of civilizations that the world forgot? Our official history, the one we learn in books, begins very suddenly, about 12,000 years ago. It is the era of the Neolithic Revolution, a moment when, seemingly out of nowhere, humanity decided to abandon a hunter-gatherer lifestyle that had served it for hundreds of thousands of years. Agriculture sprouts almost simultaneously in different corners of the globe. The first permanent settlements like Jericho and Çatalhöyük emerge from the dust. Pottery, weaving, the domestication of animals. It all flourishes in a geological blink of an eye. It's a narrative of progress so rapid and linear that it feels almost rehearsed, as if our ancestors were suddenly reading from a script handed to them after a very long 290,000-year rehearsal. To understand the depth of this mystery, we need to step back and look at our own species. Homo sapiens, in its anatomically modern form, has walked this planet for at least 300,000 years, 300 millennia. It's a span of time so vast our minds can barely conceive of it. For 96% of our existence, we lived as hunter-gatherers. Our brains were identical to ours. We had the same innate capacity for complex language, abstract thought, art, and innovation. Yet, the story we tell ourselves suggests that we spent all that time in near-complete stagnation, patiently waiting for the right moment to invent civilization. Does that make sense? Or are we looking at the past through a lens that filters out everything but the most recent chapter? Let's use a metaphor to visualize this timescale. If the entire history of the Earth, 4.5 billion years, were compressed into a single 1,000-page book, the entire existence of Homo sapiens would occupy only the last few words of the final sentence. And our recorded history, everything from the first Sumerian cities to the internet age, would be a microscopic full stop. That vast book with its 1,000 pages of planetary history is almost completely blank regarding our own narrative. We cling to that full stop as if it were the entire story, ignoring the overwhelming volume of silence that precedes it, a silence that may hide more than we imagine. The enigma deepens when we consider the intellectual capacity of our ancestors. They were not primitive brutes. They were people like us, with the same hopes, fears, and creative potential. The human brain, with its 100 billion neurons, is the most complex structure we know of in the universe, and it reached its current form a long, long time ago. Why would a brain capable of composing, Symphonies, deciphering the genetic code and questioning the cosmos, spend 300 millennia just chipping stones in the same way. It is a glaring inconsistency in our story. The idea that the biological hardware was ready, but the cultural software took so long to load, defies the logic of evolution and adaptation. What could have ignited this sudden spark? The standard explanation points to climate change at the end of the last ice age, which created favorable conditions for agriculture. But this is an incomplete explanation. Why didn't agriculture emerge in previous interglacial periods, which were also warm and stable, some even longer than our current Holocene? The transition was not an obvious step. Early agriculture was hard work, with a less varied diet and more disease than the hunter-gatherer lifestyle. The adoption of this new way of life so synchronously around the world suggests that perhaps it was not an invention, but a rediscovery, the reactivation of a knowledge that had been preserved or forgotten. Now, let's talk about the fragility of our record. The truth is, the past does not want to be found. Time is not a careful archivist, it is a relentless incinerator. The vast majority of everything ever built, written, or created by humanity simply no longer exists. Erosion by wind and water, the slow but inexorable movement of tectonic plates, the tides that rise and fall over millennia, all these processes work ceaselessly to erase the marks we leave. The history we know is just the collection of a few artifacts that, by an extraordinary fluke, survived this great erasing machine that is our planet. We do not read history, we read the wreckage. Think of the great civilizations of the Ice Age. Where would they have lived? Most likely along the coasts, where marine resources were abundant. But during the peak of the last glaciation, the sea level was about 120 meters lower than it is today. Vast tracts of coastal land, which could have hosted complex settlements, cities, or ceremonial centers, are now submerged in the depths of the ocean. We are searching for our lost history on dry land, when the most important pages may be underwater, covered by centuries of sediment and silence. The map of the prehistoric world we use is an incomplete map, with entire continents of possibility hidden beneath the waves. If our global, industrialized society were to collapse tomorrow, what would be left for the archaeologists of the future, say, in 100,000 years? Our megacities, with their skyscrapers of steel and glass, would disintegrate. The steel would rust to dust, the concrete would crumble and erode, and the forests would reclaim what was theirs. In 1,000,000 years, almost the only evidence of our existence would be a thin layer of sediment containing fossilized plastics, radioactive isotopes from our bombs, and a strange concentration of chicken bones. Without context, how could a future explorer reconstruct the complexity of our culture, our art, our science from these enigmatic traces? We would be just a geological anomaly, an unsolvable puzzle. The materials we use to build our world are incredibly fragile on the scale of deep time. We rely on metals that corrode, plastics that break down, albeit slowly, and digital technologies that are lost with a simple electromagnetic pulse. An ancient civilization that did not follow the path of heavy metallurgy and industrialization, but perhaps focused on engineering with wood, organic fibers, or even forms of sound or energy manipulation, would leave behind almost no trace at all. We would be looking for the wrong kind of ruins, using the wrong tools, and therefore, perhaps, we are finding a silence that we ourselves have created with our limited expectations of what an advanced civilization should look like. This limitation in our search is what archaeologists call preservation bias. We study what survives, not what existed. Stone is hard. Pottery is fired. Gold does not tarnish. Therefore, our image of the past is dominated by stone tools, pottery shards, and burial ornaments. It's like trying to understand the complexity of our modern society by studying only its landfills and granite monuments. We would be missing all the literature, the music, the philosophy, the science, the very soul of our culture. What we are reconstructing of the ancient past is not necessarily a faithful image, but a skeleton of stone and clay. And we are forgetting that it once had flesh, blood, and consciousness. Understanding the concept of deep time is crucial. Our human experience is measured in days, years, perhaps decades. Our brains did not evolve to comprehend intervals of 100,000 or 1,000,000 years. To us, ancient Rome seems incredibly distant, but on the timeline of humanity, it happened yesterday. This temporal myopia makes us chronocentric. We believe our time is the most important, the most advanced, the culmination of all that came before. But to the universe, our moment is just a grain of sand on an infinite beach. The humble acceptance of this vastness is the first step toward opening the mind to the possibility of other grains, other stories having existed. We tend to project a simplicity onto prehistoric man, as if his inner life were as simple as his tools. But this is a profound mistake. They were masters of their environment, with an encyclopedic knowledge of plants, animals, and the cycles of the sky, knowledge that we have now completely lost. Their lives were rich in rituals, complex mythologies, and social structures. The cave art found in places like Lascaux and Chauvet, dating back over 30,000 years, reveals a symbolic, sophisticated, and deeply spiritual mind. They were not just surviving, they were questioning, creating, feeling. They were being fully human in a world that was perhaps far more mysterious and magical than ours. The Ice Ages were not unique events, but a recurring cycle in our planet's recent history. For the last few million years, the Earth has pulsed between long periods of intense cold and brief, warm intervals, the interglacials. We live in one of these intervals, the Holocene, which has lasted for about 11,700 years. But there were others before it, some warmer and longer. These periods would have been perfect windows of opportunity for the development of agriculture and civilization. Why was only our window taken advantage of? Is it possible that civilizations flourished in these earlier planetary springs, only to be swept away and buried under kilometers of ice when the long winter inevitably returned? The search for our deepest past is, ultimately, a search for ourselves. The gaps in the archaeological record reflect the gaps in our own self-understanding. By filling them with the assumption of a simple, linear progress, we may be telling ourselves a comforting but false story. A story that places us at the top of a ladder instead of at a point on a turning wheel. The possibility of lost civilizations forces us to question the nature of progress, of memory, and of the very meaning of being human. If others achieved great things and were forgotten, what guarantees the permanence of our own memory? Perhaps we need to redefine what we call history. The Western tradition defines it as beginning with the invention of writing, just over 5,000 years ago. Everything before that is relegated to prehistory, a term that implies an unimportant period, a mere prelude. But human history did not begin with a Sumerian scribe recording grain inventories on a clay tablet. Human history began the first time one of our ancestors looked up at the night sky and wondered about their place in it all. That history, the history of consciousness, is much older and cannot be read in texts, but perhaps it can be felt in the silences. The stage is set. On one side, we have Homo sapiens, a species with a modern brain and unlimited potential, present on the world stage for an extraordinarily long time. On the other, we have a dynamic and volatile planet that methodically erases most traces of the past, and an archaeological record that is, at best, fragmentary and misleading. It is in this vast field of uncertainty, in this ocean of silent time, that we find the anomalies. They are the artifacts, structures and knowledge that simply should not be there, according to our official history. They are the whispers in the silence, the clues that we will now begin to follow. The fundamental question that emerges from this context is not how did civilization begin, but rather, did civilization begin only once? We are about to dive into the evidence that challenges the standard narrative. These are concrete facts, archaeological discoveries, and scientific breakthroughs that force us to look at the past with new eyes, not as a straight ascending line, but as a palimpsest, an ancient manuscript that has been scraped clean and rewritten multiple times, but where traces of the earlier stories can still be discerned by those who know how to look. And that is what we will do next. Learn to see the ghosts on the page. Let's begin our journey in a place that shouldn't exist, according to traditional history. On the arid plains of southeastern Turkey stands a complex called Göbekli Tepe. Discovered in the late 20th century, this site has radically rewritten our understanding of the past. Dated to 11,600 years ago, it is older than the invention of pottery, writing, and the wheel. It is older than Stonehenge by 6 millennia and the pyramids of Giza by 7. The most shocking fact is that it was built by people who until then we believed were simple nomadic hunter-gatherers. The existence of Göbekli Tepe is a temporal anomaly, an architectural echo from a time that should have been silent. The scale and complexity of the site are staggering. It consists of multiple circular enclosures, formed by T-shaped limestone pillars, some standing over 5 meters tall and weighing up to 15 tons. These monoliths are not rough stones. They are finely carved with depictions of wild animals, foxes, lions, scorpions, and vultures. The engineering required to quarry, transport, and erect these stones implies a level of social organization unprecedented for the era. It would have required hundreds of workers acting in concert with a plan, leadership, and resources to feed them. How did a supposedly pre-agricultural society, without permanent settlements, achieve such a feat? Where did the architectural knowledge and the motivation for such a monumental project come from? The conventional narrative has always been that agriculture came first. People settled down, created food surpluses, and only then had the time and resources to develop complex social structures, religion, and monumental architecture. Göbekli Tepe turns this logic on its head. Here, we have a massive ceremonial center, or temple, that predates agriculture in the region by more than 1,000 years. This suggests that it was the need to gather, to build, and worship at this site that may have driven the invention of agriculture nearby, to sustain the workers. Culture, belief, and the desire to build something lasting may have been the engine of civilization, not its consequence. The mystery deepens even further when we discover that after about 2,000 years of use, Göbekli Tepe was deliberately buried. Its creators, or their descendants, intentionally covered the entire site with earth, preserving it perfectly for us to discover millennia later. Why would they do this? Why hide such a magnificent creation? Was it an act of reverence, protecting a sacred place from the outside world? Or was it an act of fear, burying something they no longer understood or that had become dangerous? This deliberate burial is perhaps the site's deepest enigma, a final act that seems to want to send a message across time, a message we are still trying to decipher. Göbekli Tepe forces us to ask a fundamental question. What else do we not know? If a complex so vast and sophisticated could remain hidden in plain sight until recently, how many other Göbekli Tepes might lie buried under the hills and deserts of the world, or submerged beneath the oceans? This site is not just a ruin, it is proof that our timeline of human progress is, at best, incomplete, and, at worst, fundamentally wrong. It shows us an unexpected chapter of human history, suggesting that the period we call prehistory was far more dynamic and complex than our simplistic narrative allowed. Now, let's turn our gaze to agriculture itself, the cornerstone of our civilization. The story we tell is that it was a gradual invention, occurring in the Fertile Crescent around 10,000 BC and then slowly spreading across the world. However, the archaeological evidence paints a much stranger picture. Agriculture appears to have emerged independently in at least 7 or 8 regions of the world, in a very short geological time frame. In the Fertile Crescent, people domesticated wheat and barley. In China, rice and millet. In Mesoamerica, maize and beans. In the Andes, potatoes and quinoa. This global agricultural explosion is a puzzle. The climatic conditions at the beginning of the Holocene were favorable, yes, but why was this specific solution, the domestication of plants, adopted almost simultaneously by cultures that had no known contact with each other? Was it really a massive coincidence, a series of parallel inventions driven by a universal need? Or could it have been the dissemination of a pre-existing knowledge? Perhaps not the dissemination of the seeds themselves, but of the concept, the idea of agriculture, which was then adapted by different peoples to their local environments, as if they were activating a cultural software package that had been dormant. The complexity of plant domestication is also often underestimated. It is not a simple process. It takes generations of careful selection to transform a wild plant into a productive crop. Teosinte, the wild ancestor of maize, for example, is a thin grass with a few hard kernels. The transformation into modern corn was a remarkable feat of ancient genetic engineering. How did our ancestors, without knowledge of genetics, accomplish these feats? Was it just trial and error over centuries, or did they possess an understanding of heredity and cultivation that was far more sophisticated than we give them credit for? The speed and success of this transformation worldwide defy a simple explanation. Beyond agriculture, another area where ancient knowledge surprises us is astronomy. Many of the world's oldest megalithic structures are precisely aligned with celestial events. At Newgrange in Ireland, a tomb over 5,200 years old, older than the pyramids, has a special opening that allows the rising sun of the winter solstice to illuminate its innermost chamber for just a few minutes. The precision is breathtaking. To build this, its creators needed a detailed knowledge of the sun's movement throughout the year, knowledge that could only be acquired through generations of patient and systematic observation. Stonehenge in England is another famous example, aligned with the summer and winter solstices. But there are even older and more enigmatic sites. In the Sahara Desert in southern Egypt, there is a stone circle known as Nabta Playa. Dated to over 7,000 years ago, it appears to be one of the world's first astronomical observatories, with stones that align with the summer solstice sunrise and the rising of certain stars. This site suggests that the human interest in the cosmos is much older than we thought, born not in the first cities, but in cultures of nomadic pastoralists who lived in a Sahara that at the time was green and fertile. These astronomical alignments were not just for marking the seasons for farming. They reveal a deep philosophical and spiritual connection with the universe. These ancient cultures saw the earth and the sky as interconnected and the celestial cycles as a divine reflection of order and harmony. The knowledge required to create these stone calendars was immense. It involved mathematics, geometry, and the ability to record and transmit complex information over many generations, all without a system of writing. How did they do it? Through oral tradition or through systems of knowledge that we do not yet understand? What does this universal astronomical wisdom tell us? We see similar patterns in places as distant as the pyramids of Egypt, the Mayan temples, and the Nazca lines in Peru. They all seem to be tuned to the same cosmic music. Could it be that this knowledge was not developed in isolation over and over again, but that it is the fragmented legacy of a much older tradition? A proto-science, perhaps, that flourished in a distant past and whose echoes were preserved in stone by later cultures that may not have even fully understood the original meaning, but knew it was important to preserve the form, the geometry, the alignment. The earth itself holds secrets of lost worlds, not in man-made hills, but beneath the waves. At the end of the last ice age, around 10,000 years ago, the ice sheets melted and the sea level rose by more than 100 meters. This event was not gradual. There were periods of rapid, catastrophic rise. Vast areas of land that were home to human populations were inundated. A well-studied example is Doggerland, a fertile landmass that connected Britain to continental Europe. Today, it lies at the bottom of the North Sea, but it was once the heartland of Mesolithic Europe, a resource-rich place inhabited by thousands of people. Underwater archaeologists have found stone tools, animal bones, and even traces of fossilized forests on the seabed, proving that Doggerland was real. This is not speculation, but a geological and archaeological fact. The loss of Doggerland and other similar coastal areas around the world must have been a profound trauma for our ancestors. Could the stories of a great flood, present in hundreds of cultures around the globe, from the Epic of Gilgamesh to the story of Noah, be distorted and mythologized memories of these real sea-level rise events? Perhaps Atlantis is not a place, but a memory, the memory of a world lost to the sea. Off the coast of India, near the ancient city of Dwarka, marine archaeologists discovered the ruins of a massive city submerged at a depth of about 40 meters. Samples collected from the site were dated to as far back as 9,500 years ago. This discovery, if fully verified, would place a large, organized urban settlement in India thousands of years before the earliest known cities in the region. Similarly, the controversial Yonaguni Monument, a massive underwater rock formation off the coast of Japan, resembles a stepped pyramid, while many geologists argue it is a natural formation. Its sharp angles and apparent terraces have led some to believe it is a man-made structure from a forgotten past, swallowed by the sea. These underwater discoveries, whether confirmed or controversial, force us to confront an uncomfortable reality. We are searching for our history in only a fraction of the world our ancestors actually inhabited. We are exploring the attics and upper floors of a house, while the basements and foundations are completely flooded. What secrets do these submerged realms still hold? If settlements and entire cities could be lost to the waters, it is plausible that our entire understanding of the timeline of civilization is based on a severely incomplete sample of evidence, a history told only by those who lived on high ground. Our own genetic code may also contain echoes of past cataclysms. Studies of human DNA reveal that our species has gone through several population bottlenecks in its history, moments when the human population was drastically reduced to just a few thousand individuals. One of the most famous is attributed to the super eruption of the Toba volcano in Sumatra about 74,000 years ago. This event plunged the planet into a volcanic winter that lasted for years, potentially wiping out most of the human population at the time. An event like this is a true reset button. How many other such events may have occurred? Comet impacts, abrupt climate change, devastating pandemics. Any of these could have brought a flourishing civilization to its knees, leaving only small bands of survivors to start over. The genetic evidence of bottlenecks is a scar in our DNA, a silent reminder that our existence has always been precarious. Perhaps the reason we do not find evidence of ancient civilizations is because they were so completely devastated that only fragments of their DNA, carried by the few survivors, managed to cross the abyss of time. Linguistics also offers intriguing clues. Most of the world's languages can be grouped into families like Indo-European or Sino-Tibetan, which descend from a common ancestor. However, there are so-called language isolates, like Basque, spoken in Spain and France, which has no known relatives to any other language on the planet. Linguists believe that these languages are the last survivors of much older language families that have been wiped out or replaced. Basque could be a linguistic echo of a pre-Indo-European Europe, a verbal ghost of a people and a culture that have vanished from history. These linguistic relics suggest that the cultural landscape of our past was far more diverse than we can imagine. The languages that were lost took with them mythologies, histories, and systems of knowledge. Just as biodiversity is decreasing today, the lingua diversity of the past was likely reduced by cataclysms or the expansion of dominant groups. What could a language that dates back 10,000 or 20,000 years tell us? What concepts, what ideas, what worldviews were lost forever when the last person who spoke that language fell silent? Even mathematical thought, which we consider a relatively recent invention, may have much deeper roots. The Ishango bone, discovered in the Democratic Republic of Congo and dated to about 20,000 years ago, is one of the oldest mathematical artifacts ever found. It is a baboon's fibula with a series of notches. Initially, they were thought to be simple tally marks, but later analysis revealed complex patterns. One column of notches contains the prime numbers between 10 and 20. Another seems to correspond to a 6-month lunar calendar. This is not the work of a primitive mind. It is evidence of abstract mathematical thought from tens of thousands of years ago. Mathematical sophistication is not limited to small artifacts. The construction of sites like Göbekli Tepe required an implicit understanding of geometry. To create perfect circular enclosures and position the massive, T-shaped pillars, its builders needed a plan and a way to measure angles and distances accurately. Millennia later, the builders of the Egyptian pyramids would demonstrate a mastery of geometry and mathematical constants like pi and the golden ratio with a precision that still astonishes us today. Where did this knowledge come from? Was it developed slowly from scratch, or is it the inheritance of a much older mathematical tradition that was lost? The presence of this mathematical and astronomical knowledge in such remote times challenges our notion of progress. We tend to see science as an invention of ancient Greece or the Renaissance, but this evidence suggests the existence of a prehistoric proto-science, a systematic method of observing the world, recognizing patterns, and applying that knowledge in a practical way. A science that was perhaps not separate from spirituality, but intertwined with it. A science whose goal was not to dominate nature, but to understand and live in harmony with it. A science whose texts were not written on paper but in stone and in the stars. Each of these discoveries by itself is a fascinating anomaly. Göbekli Tepe, the global agricultural explosion, the megalithic astronomical observatories, the submerged cities, the genetic bottlenecks, the language isolates, and ancient mathematics. When viewed together, however, they begin to paint a different picture of the past. They are not just isolated data points, they are pieces of a puzzle that do not fit in the box we have built for it. They suggest the possibility that human history is not a single story, but many, with entire chapters torn out and lost. We are faced with a fork in our understanding. We can try to force these anomalies to fit our existing model, treating them as exceptions that prove the rule. Or we can be brave enough to admit that perhaps our model is wrong, that history is not a line, but a complex web, with threads coming from directions we did not expect. That knowledge can be lost on a massive scale and then slowly rediscovered. The historical and scientific layer, instead of giving us solid answers, has presented us with a much deeper mystery. The question that arises is no longer, are these things strange? But rather, what are these strange things trying to tell us? Are they the echoes of a single lost civilization, the famous mother culture that some researchers propose? Or are they the evidence of multiple peaks of complexity at Different times and places, multiple attempts by humanity to build something lasting, each one cut short by a cataclysm or the simple passage of time. Science gives us the clues, the hard facts, but it does not give us the narrative. These facts form the basis of our investigation. They are the solid ground upon which we can begin to build our speculations. Without them, we would be lost in fantasy. But with them, our imagination is anchored in reality. They give us permission to ask, what if? What if Göbekli Tepe is the tip of a cultural iceberg? What if agriculture was an inheritance, not an invention? What if the myths of floods and golden ages are the last fragmented memories of worlds that really existed? Modern science has provided us with incredible tools to peer into the deep past: radiocarbon dating, ancient DNA analysis, satellite remote sensing, and the more we look, the more complex and mysterious the past becomes. Every discovery that solves one puzzle seems to create two new ones. We are like explorers in a dark cave with a small flashlight. With every step, the light reveals more of the cave, but it also reveals how vast and unexplored the darkness around us is. The evidence we have reviewed so far is like the musical notes of a forgotten melody. Separated, they are just sounds. But when we hear them together, we begin to feel a harmony, a structure, the suggestion of a much larger composition. They whisper of the possibility that we are not alone on our civilizational journey, not in space, but in time. That others have walked a similar path before us, looked up at the same stars, and perhaps reached similar or even more profound conclusions. This layer of concrete evidence is essential because it keeps us from falling into the abyss of magical thinking. We are not talking about aliens or supernatural forces. We are talking about human capability. The capability of our own ancestors to achieve great things, to develop sophisticated knowledge, and to build wonders that could rival our own, perhaps not in technology, but in ingenuity, purpose, and beauty. The story we are beginning to uncover does not diminish our own achievements, but places them in a much broader and more humble context. At the end of this review of the facts, we are left with more questions than answers. The history we thought we knew now seems like a fragile construction, a bedtime story we tell ourselves to make sense of our place in time. But the cracks in that foundation are showing. Göbekli Tepe is a crack. The synchronicity of agriculture is another. Ancient astronomical knowledge is a third. These are not flaws, they are windows. Windows into a past far deeper and stranger than we ever dared to dream. Therefore, with our minds firmly anchored in these scientific and historical realities, we are now prepared to take the next step. The step that takes us from the concrete evidence to the stranger anomalies, the out-of-place artifacts, and the metaphors that can help us visualize what deep time really does to a civilization. We will move out of the clear light of archaeological facts into the twilight of mysteries that refuse to be easily explained. This is where the story gets truly interesting. What happens when we find an object that simply should not exist in the period it was found? An artifact that seems to belong to a distant future, not an ancient past. These objects, known as uparts or out-of-place artifacts, challenge our timeline and force us to question our assumptions about the capabilities of our ancestors. They are the glitch in the matrix of history, the small details that suggest the entire picture may be wrong. Our next step is to examine these glitches up close. Now, we venture into stranger territory, the realm of out-of-place artifacts, or uparts. These are objects that archaeology unearths, but whose technological sophistication or implied knowledge seems completely inconsistent with the era in which they were made. They are like a flaw in the code of history, a dissonant note in a melody we thought we knew. Conventional science often dismisses them as hoaxes, dating errors, or misinterpretations, and in many cases they are. But a few of them persist. defying easy explanations and forcing us to question whether our map of the past doesn't have vast continents of ignorance. Imagine history as a vast library, with each aisle dedicated to a specific century and each book containing the knowledge of that era. Everything is in perfect chronological order. You are walking down the aisle for the 1st century BC, and among the scrolls on Roman war tactics and Greek philosophy, you find an instruction manual for a Swiss watch. Your first reaction would be disbelief. It must be a mistake, a prank. But if the book were authentic, if the analysis of the papyrus and ink proved it belonged to that era, what would that mean? It would mean that the entire organization of the library is wrong, that an entire chapter on precision engineering has been lost. These out-of-place artifacts put us in exactly this position. They do not prove the existence of time travelers or visitors from other stars. They suggest a much more intimate and perhaps more unsettling possibility, that our own ancestors, at certain times and places, reached peaks of knowledge and technology that were subsequently lost so completely that their existence seems impossible to us today. They are the whispers of a scientific and technical tradition that existed alongside or long before the one we know, a tradition whose books were almost all burned by time. The most impressive and undeniable example of such an artifact is the Antikythera mechanism, discovered in 1901 in the wreckage of a Roman ship that sank around 60 BC near the Greek island of Antikythera. It initially appeared to be just a corroded lump of bronze. For decades, it remained largely a mystery. It was only with the advent of X-ray and CT scan technology in the late 20th and early 21st centuries that scientists could peer inside it. What they found was breathtaking, a complex system of at least 30 interlocking bronze gears with precise triangular teeth. This device was not a simple curiosity. It was an analog computer of astonishing sophistication. By turning a crank, the mechanism calculated and displayed the movements of the sun and moon through the zodiac, predicted solar and lunar eclipses with remarkable accuracy, and even marked the 4-year cycle of the Olympic Games. The complexity of its differential gear train, designed to model the subtle variations in the moon's motion, is something that historians of technology believed was far beyond the reach of ancient science. It was a piece of engineering that should not exist. The Antikythera mechanism represents a quantum leap in our understanding of Greek technology. Nothing approaching its mechanical complexity would appear in the historical record for over 1,500 years, until the construction of the great astronomical clocks in the cathedrals of medieval Europe. This raises a series of profound questions. Was this mechanism a unique creation, the work of a lone genius like Archimedes? Or is it the sole surviving example of an established tradition of precision engineering that has been completely lost to history? How many other devices like this dissolved on the seabed or were melted down for their metal? It's like finding a single rusted microchip in an excavation of a medieval monastery. The object itself is incomprehensible without the context of an entire electronics industry, an entire science of solid-state physics that made it possible. The Antikythera mechanism implies the existence of a lost tradition of knowledge in astronomy, mathematics, and mechanics. It shows us that at least one branch of ancient technology reached a level that was then forgotten for over a millennium and a half. It is concrete proof that knowledge can be, and has been, lost on a massive scale. To understand how such losses are possible, we need metaphors that help us visualize the action of deep time. One of the best is that of the palimpsest. In antiquity, parchment was expensive, so scribes would often take an old manuscript, scrape off the text, and write something new over it. At first glance, you only see the most recent text, but with the right tools like ultraviolet light, you can begin to see the faint traces of the original text, hidden. Underneath, History is a palimpsest. Our official narrative is the latest text, but discoveries like Göbekli Tepe and the Antikythera mechanism are the ghosts of the older text, showing through the layers. Another useful metaphor is that of the Earth as a cosmic geological blender. Imagine you throw various ingredients into a blender: fruits, vegetables, seeds. A civilization, with its cities and technologies, is just one of these ingredients. Now, turn the blender on the lowest speed and let it run for 1,000,000 years. The ingredients are tectonic plates moving, erosion wearing down mountains, ice ages advancing and retreating. In the end, what is left? A nearly homogeneous mixture. Future archaeologists analyzing this mixture would have immense difficulty identifying the original ingredients. Our industrial civilization in 50 million years may be just a chemical anomaly in a layer of sedimentary rock. Let's think of the burning of the Great Library of Alexandria. It was a catastrophic loss of ancient knowledge, a single event that, according to legend, set back human progress for centuries. We mourn this loss because it is recorded in history. But what about the libraries that were lost without a trace? How many Alexandrias may have been destroyed by a tsunami, buried by a volcanic eruption, or simply left to rot when the culture that created them collapsed? What if an Ice Age civilization stored its knowledge not in books, but in crystals, or in the genetic patterns of plants, or in complex oral traditions? These libraries would have been lost even more completely, without leaving even the memory of their existence. A modern analogy might be the fragility of our digital data. We store our entire civilization on hard drives, cloud servers, and in file formats that change every few years. A solar electromagnetic pulse, an economic collapse that prevents server maintenance, or simply the passage of a few centuries, and all this information could become permanently unreadable. Our distant descendants might find billions of metal and plastic discs, but they would have no way of knowing they once contained the entirety of human art, science, and history. Perhaps past civilizations had their own fragile data formats, and all we are finding are their erased hard drives. The ship of Theseus paradox can also be applied to knowledge. The ship is restored over time, with each rotten plank being replaced by a new one. In the end, none of the original planks remain. Is it still the same ship? Ancient knowledge may have survived in the same way. The scientific truths of a lost civilization may have been passed down, but over millennia, without the original context, they transformed. Astronomy became astrology, psychology became mythology, physics became magic. Perhaps the great truths of the past are still with us, but they are disguised as stories and rituals, their original planks completely replaced, unrecognizable to our modern science. Beyond the Antikythera mechanism, there are other maps and documents that hint at a lost geographical knowledge. The Piri-Reis map, drawn in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral, is famous for supposedly showing the coast of Antarctica, centuries before its official discovery. The map claims to have been compiled from much older source maps, some dating back to the time of Alexander the Great. While the interpretation is highly debated, it represents a persistent anomaly. How could ancient cartographers have mapped a coastline that is now covered by kilometers of ice? Was Antarctica ice-free in the recent human past? Another enigma is the vitrified forts of Scotland and other parts of Europe. These are ancient stone walls dating from the Iron Age, whose surfaces have been melted and fused into a glass-like substance. The temperature required to vitrify rock in this way is extremely high, over 1,100 degrees Celsius, and sustained for a long time. How exactly Iron Age people managed to generate and control such heat is an archaeological mystery. Were they accidents, the result of the burning of timber superstructures, or was it a deliberate act using a lost fire technology, perhaps to strengthen the walls or as an act of ritualistic destruction. Then there is the so-called Baghdad Battery. Discovered near Baghdad, Iraq, it is a set of artifacts dating back about 2,000 years. It consists of a ceramic pot containing a copper cylinder and inside that an iron rod. If the pot were filled with an electrolyte like grape juice or vinegar, it could produce a small electric current, about 1 volt. Its purpose is unknown. Could it have been used for electroplating objects with a thin layer of precious metal, or for some form of ritualistic electrotherapy? Even if its purpose was simple, it demonstrates an empirical understanding of electrochemical principles that were officially only discovered in the late 18th century by Alessandro Volta. The emergence of the Sumerian civilization in Mesopotamia about 6,000 years ago is also an anomaly in itself. They seem to appear on the historical stage with a complete civilizational package: cuneiform writing, a complex legal system, organized city-states, metallurgy, and most notably, an incredibly detailed astronomical knowledge. Their lists of planets included all the ones we know up to Saturn, and they seem to know about the precession of the equinoxes, a 26,000-year cycle of the Earth's wobble, whose calculation requires precise observations for centuries. Where did this instant knowledge come from? The Sumerian myths themselves speak of beings, the Apkallu, who came from the sea and gave them the foundations of civilization. A more modern but equally intriguing case is that of the Dogon people of Mali in West Africa. Anthropologists in the 1930s reported that Dogon's sacred traditions contained surprisingly accurate knowledge about the Sirius star system. They knew that Sirius, the brightest star in the sky, had a companion, a small, dense and invisible white dwarf star, which they called Po Tolo. They also correctly described its 50-year elliptical orbit. Western science only confirmed the existence of Sirius B in the 19th century and its extreme density in the 20th. While the source of this knowledge is fiercely debated, with many suggesting contamination from European visitors, the story persists as a powerful allegory for the possibility of ancient, unexplained knowledge. Findings like this remind us how little we truly know. If you're fascinated by these missing pieces of history, subscribing will keep you close to the next revelation as we continue to explore these enigmas together. Each of these anomalies in isolation can be explained away or dismissed. However, when we look at them as a set, a pattern begins to emerge. They are not random. They consistently point to pockets of sophisticated knowledge in astronomy, mathematics, geography, and engineering, appearing and disappearing at unexpected moments in history, like lights blinking in the darkness of deep time. Are all these anomalies just a series of coincidences and misinterpretations? It is the simplest explanation, and therefore the most likely according to the principle of Occam's razor. However, the persistence and consistency of these mysteries invite us to consider an alternative. What if they are exactly what they appear to be? Debris, the scattered fragments of a shipwrecked civilization, washed ashore on the beaches of our recorded history. The metaphors of the palimpsest and the geological blender are not just poetic devices. They are tools for thought. They help us overcome our temporal myopia and conceive of the true scale of destruction that time and geology can inflict. Without these tools, our minds remain trapped in our short-lived human experience, where the things we build seem permanent and large-scale knowledge loss seems unlikely. These metaphors free us to imagine the unimaginable, to contemplate the possibility that what we know is just the foam on an ocean of lost history. Perhaps the correct perspective is not that we are discovering a primitive past, but that we are a species with amnesia. Imagine waking up one day with no memory of your life except for a few flashes and strange objects in your pockets, a key to an unknown door, a faded photograph of a face you do not recognize. Humanity may be in this situation. Our recorded history is the life we have built since we woke up. But the myths, the anomalies, the unexplained ruins, these are the objects in our pockets, hinting at a previous life, a youth we have completely forgotten. This feeling of forgetfulness, of a lost, grander past, is a recurring theme in many cultures. Hesiod's Golden Age, the Garden of Eden, Plato's Atlantis. All these stories speak of a time when humanity was wiser, happier, and lived in harmony with the world. A paradise that was lost due to a cataclysm or a moral failing. Are these just nostalgic fables, a yearning for an imaginary past? Or are they cultural memories, distorted and romanticized over millennia, of a historical reality? The anomalies we have explored serve as bridges. They connect the factual world of science and archaeology, which we discussed earlier, with the world of plausible speculation, toward which we are now heading. They are the facts that do not fit, the data that demand a new hypothesis. They give us permission to ask, if cultures with such advanced knowledge existed, what were they like? Where did they live? And the most important question of all, what happened to them? We have seen the enigmatic smoke. Now it is time to start looking for the possible fires. The existence of just one Antikythera mechanism changes everything. It proves that the loss of advanced technology is not a fantasy, but a historical reality. Once we accept that such a high level of mechanical knowledge could be achieved and then completely forgotten for 1,500 years, the door opens to considering other losses, perhaps even greater ones. What if the loss was not limited to mechanics, but also encompassed medicine, physics, or material science? And what if the period of forgetting was not 1,500 years, but 15,000 or 150,000? The idea of linear progress crumbles in the face of these anomalies. The image of a ladder that humanity steadily climbs, step by step, is replaced by a more chaotic and perhaps more realistic image, that of a child building and knocking down towers of blocks. Some blocks are reused in the next tower, but the shape and height of the previous tower are forgotten. Perhaps we have built very tall towers before, only to see them crumble. And now we are simply in the process of building another one, believing it is the first time. The silence of the deep past, which once seemed empty, now begins to fill with echoes and possibilities. It is no longer a silence of absence, but a silence of loss. The voices were silenced, the cities were erased, but the anomalous artifacts remain as the last silent witnesses. They are proof that there was something there, even if we cannot see clearly what it was. They challenge us to listen more closely, to look more carefully at the blank spaces on our map of history. These mysteries prepare us for the next phase of our journey. We have moved from scientific facts to disconcerting anomalies. Now we must take a further step into the realm of speculative hypotheses. Using the clues we have gathered, we will try to reconstruct some of the possible scenarios for these lost civilizations, not as fiction, but as exercises of informed imagination based on the evidence and the gaps we have identified. What could these worlds have been like? What different paths could civilization have taken? This exploration leads us to a deeper understanding of ourselves. By imagining these other possibilities, these other humans, we realize that our own civilization, with its specific technology and values, is just one of many possible forms of being. It is not the inevitable destiny of humanity, but just a choice, a path among many. The anomalies do not just show us a lost past, they show us alternative futures that never happened and perhaps futures that still could. The psychological impact of contemplating these anomalies is profound. It is the feeling of vertigo one gets when looking into an abyss, the realization that the solid ground beneath our feet is not so solid after all. Our collective identity is rooted in our history. If that history is fundamentally different from what we believe, then who are we? Are we the pioneers of planet Earth, or just the amnesiac heirs of a forgotten legacy? The out-of-place objects and the metaphors for deep time have given us a new set of lenses. With them, the past no longer seems like a simple, primitive place. It looks like a cemetery of worlds, a debris field of countless civilizational experiments. We are walking among the tombstones, trying to decipher the inscriptions erased by time, feeling the weight of the stories they can no longer tell. The next step is to give these tombstones a voice. It is to try to reconstruct the stories, however fragmented they may be. It is where science meets philosophy and archaeology meets myth. We will explore the grand hypotheses about how civilizations could have arisen and vanished in the vast cycles of time, long before the dawn of our own recorded history. It is a journey into the heart of what if. The anomalies are the keys. They unlock doors in our minds that were closed by the certainty of our own narrative. Now that these doors are open, we are ready to peer at what lies on the other side. We will not find definitive answers, but we will find a universe of questions that are, in themselves, more valuable. Questions that expand our notion of what is possible and what it means to be human. As the night deepens, let these images resonate. The ancient computer at the bottom of the sea, the ghost text on the parchment, the unreadable message on the broken hard drive. They are all facets of the same great mystery, the fragility of memory. Not just individual memory, but the memory of a species, and the possibility that we have forgotten far more than we will ever know. Having crossed the terrain of concrete evidence and disconcerting anomalies, we now arrive at a crossroads. The clues we have don't point to a hidden history, but they do not provide us with the complete map. To fill these gaps, we must take a cautious but necessary step into the realm of informed speculation. This is not a dive into fantasy, but an exercise in reconstruction. Using the fragments we have, the ruin out of time, the knowledge out of place, we will try to imagine the structures to which they might have once belonged. This is where imagination becomes a tool of investigation, allowing us to build hypotheses about the worlds that may have existed in the vast darkness of our past. These hypotheses should not be seen as competing theories, where only one can be true. It is more useful to think of them as different lenses, each offering a unique perspective on the same profound mystery. One lens focuses on the oceans and the ice, another on the nature of consciousness, a third on the great cycles of the cosmos. By looking through each of them, we do not seek a final answer, but a richer understanding of the range of possibilities. The truth, if it can be found at all, may not lie in a single hypothesis, but in the overlap and resonance between them all. Our goal in this stage of the journey is to expand our sense of what is possible. It is to free our imagination from the shackles of the linear narrative we have been taught. Each scenario we will explore is built upon the foundations we have established: the vast antiquity of humanity, the fragility of the geological record, and the anomalies that defy conventional explanation. Let's begin by looking at the most obvious yet most overlooked place to search for a lost world, under the waters that cover most of our planet. Let us postulate the existence of a pre-glacial civilization, a culture that flourished not in our warm interglacial period, the Holocene, but at the end of the Ice Age itself. Its home would not be on the inland continents, which were largely covered by ice or were inhospitable tundras, but on the vast continental shelves exposed by the low sea levels. This would not be a terrestrial agrarian civilization, but a global thalassocracy, an empire of the ocean. Its people would be master navigators, its highways the ocean currents, and its culture unified by the sea. The characteristics of such a civilization would be shaped by its environment. They would have a deep knowledge of astronomy, not for spiritual reasons, but as a practical necessity for long-distance navigation. Their settlements would be a network of ports and coastal cities spread across the globe, allowing for trade and the exchange of ideas on a global scale. This could explain the sudden and near-simultaneous appearance of complex ideas, like agriculture and megalithic construction, after the end of the Ice Age. They would not be inventions, but reintroductions carried to different parts of the world by the survivors of this broken global network. The technology of a maritime civilization would be different from ours. They might have placed less emphasis on heavy metallurgy, which corrodes quickly in the marine environment, and more on engineering with stone, wood, and other organic materials. Their sophistication might lie in the design of their ships, their understanding of tides and winds, and their knowledge of marine biology. They might have practiced forms of aquaculture that would leave few traces. The megalithic structures we see on land could be just the outposts or ceremonial sites of a culture, whose true heartland is now 100 meters deep. Within this scenario, the anomalies we have discussed begin to make sense. The Piri race map ceases to be a mystery and becomes a possible remnant of this civilization's global cartography. The myths of gods or civilizing heroes arriving from the sea, like Oannes in Sumeria or Viracocha in the Andes, could be distorted memories of the surviving seafarers who brought knowledge to the more primitive inland populations. And sites like Göbekli Tepe, built inland but with surprising knowledge, could have been a meeting point, a refugee project to preserve their cosmic knowledge after their world had been destroyed. And what a destruction it would have been. The end of the Ice Age was not a gentle thaw. It was punctuated by catastrophic events. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, for example, suggests that one or more fragments of a comet struck the Earth around 12,800 years ago. Such an event would have triggered massive earthquakes, global firestorms, and most importantly for a coastal civilization, colossal tsunamis and meltwater pulses that led to a rapid and devastating rise in sea level. For a thalassocracy, this would be the apocalypse. Their entire world would, quite literally, disappear beneath the waves in a matter of days or years. The survivors would have been few and scattered, taking refuge in highlands with local populations. They would have lost their infrastructure, their tools, and their power base. All they would have left was their knowledge, fragments of astronomy, architecture, agriculture, and their own traumatic stories. These stories, passed down through generations, would have become our universal myths of a great flood, of a paradisiacal civilization lost to the sea, of a golden age that was suddenly ended by a catastrophe sent from the heavens. Atlantis may not be the name of a city, but the name of a memory. This hypothesis is powerful because it uses known scientific mechanisms: sea level rise at the end of the Ice Age and possible cosmic impact events, to explain a wide range of archaeological and mythological evidence. It transforms the oceans of our planet from a barrier into a bridge, and from a void into a vast, unexplored archaeological site. Perhaps we have not been looking for our lost history in the right places. Perhaps we have been looking at the leaves of a tree when the roots are all submerged. Now, let's switch lenses. What if an advanced civilization didn't need industrial technology? Let's imagine a culture that took a completely different developmental path. Instead of focusing on the manipulation of external matter, metal, stone, energy, they focused on internal matter. Their science was not physics and chemistry, but a deep understanding of biology, genetics, and most importantly, consciousness. They did not build machines. They cultivated life and the mind. Such a civilization would look very different from ours. Instead of cities of concrete, they might have lived in living cities, shaped from trees or coral through genetic engineering. Instead of vehicles, they might have used genetically modified animals for transport. Their agriculture would be so advanced, it would seem like magical gardening. And for tasks requiring strength, like building megalithic structures, they might have mastered technologies that seem esoteric to us, like sonic levitation, using precise sound frequencies to nullify the weight of stone, allowing multi-ton blocks to be moved with ease. Findings like this remind us how little we truly know. If you're fascinated by these missing pieces of history, subscribing will keep you close to the next revelation as we continue to explore these enigmas together. The core technology of such a civilization, however, would be a science of consciousness. Through rigorous mental disciplines, they could have developed capabilities that we now label as psychic, telepathy for communication, clairvoyance for observation, and perhaps even telekinesis. Their understanding of physics might have come not from particle accelerators, but from an inner exploration of the nature of reality. What would be the evidence of such a civilization? Almost none, and that's the point. A technology based on biology and the mind is biodegradable. Their living cities would rot and return to nature. Their knowledge, stored in oral traditions or in elevated states of consciousness, would die with the people. The only traces that might survive would be their works in stone, the only things they made that were not alive. This could explain the enigmas of megalithic construction, like the perfectly fitted stones of Pumapunku in Bolivia. They were not cut with simple tools, but perhaps shaped with sound or another form of energy. The myths and spiritual practices of the world could be the distant echoes of this science of consciousness. Shamanism, yoga, meditation, they could be the degraded and ritualized versions of a once powerful mental discipline. The myths of magic, of men who could talk to animals, move objects with their minds or see the future, might not be fantasies, but memories of human capabilities that have been lost. The crystal skulls, anomalous artifacts found in various parts of the world, could have been a form of information storage technology based on a physics of crystals that we do not understand. The collapse of a non-industrial civilization would be silent, but total. Without a robust physical technology, they would be extremely vulnerable to natural cataclysms. An impact event or a sudden climate shift would annihilate them. And with the death of its most skilled practitioners, their complex and subtle science would simply evaporate. It would be as if an entire library of knowledge existed only in the minds of a handful of librarians. If they died, the knowledge would disappear forever without leaving a single book behind. This hypothesis forces us to question our own definition of advancement. We equate progress with mechanical complexity and energy consumption. But what if that is just one path, and a potentially destructive one? Perhaps there was a wiser, more sustainable, more integrated form of advancement. Perhaps the reason we don't find their factories and their toxic waste is because they were advanced enough not to need them. Perhaps we are searching for a radio signal when the message is being transmitted telepathically. Now, let's use a third lens, which moves away from specific civilizations to contemplate a larger pattern. This is the hypothesis of cosmic cycles, an idea that is omnipresent in ancient thought. Many cultures, from the Hindus with their Yuga cycle to the Mayans with their long counts, believed that history does not move in a straight line, but in great cycles, often linked to slow astronomical movements like the precession of the equinoxes, the nearly 26,000-year cycle caused by the wobble of the Earth's axis. In this model, human consciousness and civilizational development are tied to these great cosmic cycles. There are seasons of history, a golden age, Satya Yuga, when humanity is at its spiritual and intellectual peak, followed by a slow descent through a silver and bronze age, culminating in a dark or iron age, Kali Yuga, a period of ignorance and materialism before the cycle begins anew. Each complete cycle represents a great year. What if our recorded history is just the Chronicle of the most recent dark age, this view radically recontextualizes our past. The progress we have experienced in the last few thousand years would not be the beginning of civilization, but rather the first signs of awakening from a deep sleep, the beginning of a new spring after a long cosmic winter. The civilizations of the last golden age, perhaps 12,000 or 13,000 years ago, would have reached heights we can barely imagine. Their demise would not have been caused by a single cataclysm, but by a natural shift in the cosmic cycle, a slow descent into ignorance that may have been accelerated by natural disasters. The evidence for this hypothesis is subtle and symbolic. The insistence of the ancients on aligning their monuments with the stars, especially with the constellations of the zodiac, may have been their way of marking time within this great cosmic clock. The orientation of the Sphinx at Giza, for example, which once gazed directly at its celestial counterpart. The constellation of Leo, at sunrise on the spring equinox around 10,500 BC, could be one of these markers. The myths of rise and fall would not be about empires, but about human consciousness itself throughout the ages. We, in our modern secular age, dismiss these ideas as astrology and mysticism, but what if the ancients had a functional knowledge of how cosmic cycles and the electromagnetic fields of the solar system influence life and consciousness on Earth? What if their science was more holistic, connecting the microcosm of the human being to the macrocosm of the universe in a way that our reductionist science cannot yet perceive? This hypothesis suggests that our oldest myths are not distorted history, but distorted physics. The beauty of this cyclical hypothesis is that it can encompass the others. The pre-glacial maritime civilization could have been the civilization of the last golden age. Its collapse, triggered by the Younger Dryas impact, could have been the event that marked the transition into the Dark Age. The science of consciousness of the non-industrial civilization could be the defining feature of a golden age, a knowledge that is naturally lost as human consciousness descends through the cycle into a more materialistic state. It offers us a framework for our forgetting. We did not forget because we were careless, but because forgetting is a natural part of the cycle, like the trees losing their leaves in autumn. And crucially, it offers hope. If we are in a cycle, then the Dark Age is not permanent. It is followed by a new dawn. Perhaps our current technological rebirth, combined with a growing yearning for spiritual meaning, is the sign that we are emerging from the lowest point of the cycle, beginning the long climb back to the light. Finally, we must briefly consider the most controversial yet persistent hypothesis, that of external influence. This idea does not require spaceships or little green men. The influence could be much more subtle. What if the spark of knowledge that ignited civilization was not entirely generated by humanity, but was a gift or an inheritance from an other source? That source could be a non-human intelligence native to Earth, perhaps a species that evolved long before us and lives in an environment we rarely explore, like the depths of the oceans. Or perhaps the influence was a legacy, an ancient civilization, perhaps from elsewhere in the solar system, that visited Earth in the distant past and left behind a repository of knowledge, a kind of time capsule for the intelligent species that would one day evolve. The discovery of such an artifact by anatomically modern humans could have triggered the Great Leap Forward, providing an instruction manual for civilization, explaining mathematics, astronomy, and philosophy. This would explain the sudden appearance of complex knowledge without the need for millennia of development. The myths of the world are filled with such stories. Prometheus stealing fire from the gods, Quetzalcoatl bringing writing and the calendar to the peoples of Mesoamerica, the Sumerian Apkallu, amphibious beings who taught the arts of civilization. We dismiss these stories as allegories, but what if they are literal? What if the gods were simply the bearers of a knowledge that seemed divine to our ancestors? The universal reverence for serpent or dragon figures in creation myths could be a symbol for this strange, non-human source of wisdom. In this scenario, human history becomes the story of a species trying to decipher an instruction manual it does not fully understand. We make mistakes, we misinterpret the instructions, we lose entire pages of the book. The different cultures of the world would be different attempts to reconstruct the original knowledge from fragments. Our religions, our philosophies, and even our sciences could be the distorted echoes of that initial lesson given by a teacher who has long since departed. Each of these hypotheses, the lost thalassocracy, the science of consciousness, the cosmic cycles, and the external spark, stretches our imagination in different ways. They offer us alternative narratives that are, in many respects, as plausible as the story we tell ourselves once we accept the depth of our unknowing. They transform the past from a place of simple certainties to a place of profound mysteries and limitless possibilities. They are also not mutually exclusive. It is possible to imagine a scenario that combines them, a golden age civilization cosmic cycle that was a global maritime network, thalassocracy, whose technology was based on consciousness and biology, non-industrial, and whose original knowledge was sparked by an external inheritance, the spark. Its collapse, around 12,800 years ago, marked the end of a cycle and the beginning of our long amnesia, from which we are only just beginning to awaken. The exploration of these alternative scenarios serves a profound purpose. It is not about proving one hypothesis or another to be correct. It is about practicing intellectual humility. It is about recognizing that our version of history is just that, a version, a story, and that other stories are possible. By imagining these other worlds, we open our minds to the idea that our own civilization is not the pinnacle or the endpoint, but just another experiment in the long and winding journey of consciousness on this planet. These speculations give us a new language to talk about the past. Instead of caveman, we can say catastrophe survivor. Instead of primitive myth, we can say distorted memory. Instead of invention, we can say rediscovery. This change in language is subtle but powerful. It shifts our perception of who our ancestors were and, by extension, who we are. We are not the geniuses who invented everything from scratch, but perhaps the amnesiac heirs of a vast and forgotten inheritance. This inheritance may not only be in stone ruins or corroded artifacts. It may be inside us. Our DNA may hold dormant potentials. Our myths may contain coded knowledge. Our deepest brain structures may be attuned to cosmic cycles we have forgotten how to listen to. The search for lost civilizations in the outer world may ultimately be a search for a lost potential within ourselves, an attempt to remember what our species once knew. The night is a good time to contemplate these ideas. In the stillness, when the distractions of the day fade, the mind opens to the vast and the mysterious. The stars that shine through your window are the same stars that the navigators of a possible Ice Age thalassocracy used to guide their ships. They are the same stars whose cycles the builders of ancient temples may have encoded in stone. They are a constant, a bridge that connects us to all these lost worlds and all these possibilities. As we ponder these hypotheses, we do not have to choose one. We can simply hold them in our minds as possibilities, as dreams of what might have been. Each dream expands our understanding of human potential. Each one reminds us that history is much bigger, stranger, and more magical than the dry, linear narrative we are usually presented with. We are part of a much more epic story than we realize. What do these possibilities mean for us, here and now? If history is cyclical, what does our current time portend? If knowledge can be lost on such a massive scale, how secure are we that our own civilization will not suffer the same fate? These speculative hypotheses are not just about the past. They are mirrors that reflect our present and our potential future. They lead us to the final layer of our investigation, the implications. How does the possibility of a rebooted past change our view of ourselves, our place in the universe, and the path we are on? This is the question to which we will now turn. Having journeyed from facts to anomalies, and from anomalies to hypotheses, we are now ready to harvest the philosophical fruits of this journey. We are ready to ask what it all means. Let your mind float in these scenarios. Imagine the cities of coral. Hear the sound that moves stone. Feel the turning of the great cosmic cycle. These are not just fairy tales to fall asleep to. They are exercises in the expansion of consciousness. They are invitations to remember that we are more than we think we are, and that our past is an ocean of yet unsounded depths. And in that ocean swim the ghosts of worlds that were once as real as our own. The hypotheses we have explored are not mere intellectual exercises. They have the power to fundamentally alter our perception of ourselves and our place in the universe. The first and most profound implication is the collapse of the myth of linear progress. Our modern civilization is built on the implicit belief that history is an upward, uninterrupted march from ignorance to knowledge, from primitivism to sophistication. We see ourselves as the inevitable result and the pinnacle of this journey. But if complex civilizations have existed and perished, then progress is not a law of nature. It is a fragile state, a tide that can rise, but which can also and has receded. This revelation forces us to redefine the very meaning of progress. We measure our advancement by the speed of our processes, the height of our buildings, and the destructive power of our weapons. But what if a prior civilization measured its progress by its depth of compassion, its harmony with the environment, or its exploration of consciousness? The possibility of forgotten pasts invites us to question our own values. Are we progressing in the right direction, or are we climbing a technological ladder that is leaning against the wrong wall, while we forget other forms of growth that are far more essential? Contemplating these lost worlds is a powerful antidote to the arrogance of modernity. We feel like the masters of the planet, the first species to crack the code of matter and reach for the stars. The idea that we may be simply a recovery civilization, painstakingly rebuilding what others already knew, is deeply humbling. We are not giants standing on the shoulders of primitives. Perhaps we are children playing with building blocks, unaware that we are sitting on the buried foundations of cities of giants. This humility is not a weakness, but a doorway to a deeper wisdom. Each forgotten cycle, each fallen civilization, becomes a cautionary tale, a ghostly whisper from deep time. The reasons for their downfall, whether it was a cosmic cataclysm, runaway climate change, self-inflicted environmental degradation, or an internal social collapse, are relevant to us. The past, in this context, ceases to be a distant prologue and becomes a mirror of our own potential future. By ignoring the possibility of these cycles, we risk repeating the same mistakes, walking the same path to oblivion, convinced until the very last moment that we are the exception to the rule. Our relationship with our own technology is also called into question. We rely on it absolutely, but its complexity makes it incredibly vulnerable. The knowledge required to maintain our digital infrastructure, our power grid, or our advanced medicine is in the hands of a relatively small number of specialists. A catastrophe that interrupted the transmission of that knowledge for just 1 or 2 generations would turn our technology into incomprehensible magic and useless junk. The Antikythera mechanism proves that technological amnesia is possible. Our world of glass and silicon is perhaps more fragile than a pyramid of stone. This perspective triggers a fundamental identity shift from inventors to inheritors. We cease to be the geniuses who created civilization from scratch and become the beneficiaries of a fragmented legacy. This shift is subtle, but it transforms everything. Our science, our art, and our philosophy may not be entirely new creations, but the rediscovery and reinterpretation of themes and knowledge that echo through the millennia. Human creativity becomes less an act of creation and more an act of remembrance, of tuning into an ancient melody that has always been playing in the background. With this new identity, our view of the world's myths and religions is transformed. They are no longer seen as primitive superstitions or fairy tales for children. Instead, they become potential time capsules, complex information, storage devices designed to survive a dark age. A flood myth might encode data about paleoclimatology. A genealogy of gods might map astronomical cycles. A story about magic might contain instructions for a science of consciousness. Learning to read the language of myth may be as important as deciphering the human genome. If our distant ancestors possessed a science of consciousness or other latent capabilities, then that potential has not vanished. It must lie dormant in our collective DNA, in our neurological structure, in what Carl Jung called the collective unconscious. The search for the lost past then becomes an inner quest. Practices like meditation, lucid dreaming, or the exploration of altered states of consciousness cease to be New Age hobbies and become a form of psychic archaeology, an attempt to unearth the forgotten capabilities of the human mind. The possibility of older, perhaps wiser civilizations also redefines our relationship with the planet. Many of the hypotheses we explored suggest cultures that lived in greater harmony with the Earth, seeing it not as a resource to be exploited, but as a living organism of which they were a part. In the midst of our current ecological crisis, this idea is more relevant than ever. The wisdom we need to ensure our survival may not lie in further technological innovation, but in the remembrance of an older, more balanced way of being, a wisdom that sees the web of life as sacred. The great megalithic sites of the world, like Karnak, Teotihuacan, or Angkor Wat, take on a new meaning. They are no longer just tombs or temples for forgotten gods. They become a library of stone, a geological instruction manual. They might be astronomical observatories, subtle energy machines, or resonance chambers designed to interact with the Earth's electromagnetic field. They are proof that science can take very different forms, and that its ancient practitioners knew things about physics, geology, and the cosmos that we are only just beginning to rediscover. This vision of a deep, shared past has the power to unite us. The historical narratives we learn often emphasize the divisions, the wars, and the differences between cultures. But the idea that we are all, ultimately, the survivors of the same cycle of catastrophes and the heirs of the same fragmented wisdom tradition creates a sense of common human heritage that transcends national and ethnic boundaries. We are all descendants of a forgotten past, fellow travelers on the same planetary spaceship, trying to remember our destination. The acceptance of a cyclical model for history radically changes our orientation toward the future. In a linear view, the goal is infinite growth, endless expansion. In a cyclical view, the goal becomes wisdom, sustainability, and the conscious navigation through the seasons of the great year. We begin to think not in terms of fiscal quarters or 5-year plans, but in terms of centuries and millennia. Our duty is not just to our children, but to the generations who will live 10,000 years from now. This perspective prompts us to think seriously about how to preserve our own knowledge for the next cycle. If our civilization were to collapse, what would we want to pass on to the survivors and their distant descendants? How can we create a time capsule that is both understandable and durable for tens of thousands of years? This challenge inspires projects that think in the long now, seeking ways to engrave our knowledge in near-permanent media, so that the next humanity does not have to start completely from scratch. The search for extraterrestrial intelligence, or SETI, is also recontextualized. The Silurian hypothesis, the idea that industrial civilizations could have existed on Earth millions of years ago, suggests that perhaps we are looking in the wrong place. The great silence in the cosmos may not mean we are alone, but that technological civilizations are inherently unstable and short-lived. Perhaps their average lifespan is too short for two of them to exist at the same time in the same galactic neighborhood. The real challenge may not be traveling between the stars, but surviving on our own planet for a long period of time. The most pressing implication, however, is that of survival. By studying the possible catalysts of past collapses, we learn about the threats we face today. Research into paleoclimate informs us about how quickly the Earth's climate can change. The search for impact craters reminds us that our solar system is a dynamic and sometimes dangerous place. The study of the past is not a luxury. It is an essential component of a planetary early warning system, a way to learn from the mistakes of our forgotten ancestors so that we do not repeat their fate. This points to a new kind of exploration. While the space race to other planets continues to capture our imagination, perhaps the most important discoveries about the future of humanity lie right here on Earth, in the depths of our oceans, under the ice of Antarctica, within our own genome, and in the unexplored depths of human consciousness. The great frontier may not be outer space, but deep time and inner space. It is there that the answers to our biggest questions, where did we come from and where are we going, may be waiting. Ultimately, this journey redefines our collective purpose. If we are not the pinnacle of creation, but just one link in a long chain of rise and fall, then what is the purpose of it all? Perhaps the journey of consciousness on a planet like Earth is a process of spiral learning, not circular. Each cycle is not a simple repetition, but an opportunity to integrate the lessons of the previous one and reach a higher level of wisdom. Perhaps our purpose is to remember, to heal, and finally to transcend the cycle of amnesia. On a personal level, immersing oneself in this mystery re-enchants a world that we have often lost in adulthood. The world ceases to be a known, predictable place and becomes once again a realm of wonder and infinite possibility. History transforms from a dry, academic subject into an epic detective story, where every ancient stone and every forgotten myth is a clue to the greatest mystery of all, our own identity. This wonder is a balm for a world-weary soul. Paradoxically, there can be a profound comfort in this grand perspective. Our current crises and anxieties, while real and urgent, are seen as part of a much larger drama. We are a single wave in the ocean of time. Our civilization is a single flower in a garden that has bloomed and withered many times before. This realization does not encourage passivity, but it can ease the burden of our self-importance, allowing us to act with more grace and less fear as participants in a story that is much bigger than ourselves. This leads us to reflect on the nature of memory itself. The fragility of a species' collective memory mirrors the fragility of our own individual memory. How much of our own past have we forgotten or reinterpreted? What stories do we tell ourselves about our own lives to create a narrative of linear progress? The amnesia of civilization is a mirror for our own condition, inviting us to a more honest inquiry into who we are, based not just on what we remember, but on what we feel we have forgotten. The final implication is not a call to strident action, but a quiet invitation to listen to the whispers that come from the past, to listen to the language of the stones, the rhythm of the stars, the echoes in our deepest myths, and the quiet voice of intuition within us. In a noisy world, obsessed with the future, the greatest wisdom may come from cultivating a stillness and a receptivity to the forgotten past. The truth does not shout, it whispers. This journey changes the way we look at the night sky. The stars are no longer just objects of astronomical study. They become the great clock, map, and storybook of our planet. In their ancient light, we see the same beacons that guided lost sailors and inspired temple builders. They connect us across the abyss of time to all the other souls who have ever looked up and asked the same questions. They are a constant reminder of our belonging to something vast and eternal. In the end, the search for lost civilizations in deep time is a journey that leads us back to ourselves. The questions about them, what they knew, how they lived, what happened to them, inevitably become questions about us. Who are we, stripped of our modern arrogance? What are we capable of beyond the limits we impose on ourselves? What is the story we choose to live in, and what legacy will we leave for the next cycle? And so, we are left with the need to embrace uncertainty. It may be that we will never find the smoking gun, the irrefutable proof of a lost past. History may forever remain a realm of shadows and possibilities, and perhaps that is the most important thing. The value is not in finding the final answer, but in living with the question. It is the question itself that expands our minds, deepens our spirits, and transforms us in the process. The mystery is the destination. Our nocturnal journey is coming to an end. We started with a simple question, a what if, whispered in the darkness, and we have followed its trail through time. We have journeyed through the scientific foundations of our history, stood before the anomalies that defy our narrative, dreamed of the alternative worlds that these clues suggest, and pondered what their mere possibility means for us. We have not arrived at a final destination, at a clear and comforting answer. Instead, the path has widened, and the landscape of our own history has become infinitely larger, stranger, and more mysterious than when we began. The map has not been filled in. We have been shown how vast the unknown territory is. We return, then, to the question that started it all. What if our history is not a straight line, but a cycle? What if we are living in just the latest of many chapters, ignorant of the worlds that came before? This question now no longer sounds like an idle fantasy. It resonates with the weight of the stones of Göbekli Tepe, with the precision of the gears of Antikythera, and with the persistent echo of flood myths found across the globe. The possibility of a rebooted past has ceased to be a fringe speculation and has become a shadow that looms over our own history, a shadow that invites us to humility and to awe. The vast silence of prehistory, which once seemed empty and primitive to us, is now populated, not with certainties, but with ghosts of possibility. It is no longer a silence of absence, but a silence of profound loss. It is the silence that follows a magnificent song that has ended. It is the quiet of a vast library, submerged beneath the waves of time, its stories slowly dissolving in the salt water. As we listen closely to that silence now, we can almost feel the resonance of the voices that were silenced, the cities that were erased, and the knowledge that was forgotten. And the myths, the stories of a golden age, of a great flood that washed the world clean, of gods who walked among mortals and taught the arts of civilization. Will we continue to see them as simple fables, the dreams of a young species trying to make sense of a frightening world? Or will we dare to see them as they might be, distorted, but persistent cultural memories, the last embers of a fire that went out millennia ago, passed down from generation to generation by survivors who may not have fully understood the story they were telling, but knew it was vital that it not be forgotten. The artifacts we touch or see behind the glass of a museum become more than mere objects. They are messengers. The Antikythera mechanism is not just a corroded piece of bronze. It is a letter from a lost world, written in a language of engineering that took us 1,500 years to relearn. The stones of Pumapunku are not just carved blocks, they are physical questions about technology and method. What other messages are still out there, buried under sand, ice or water, waiting for the right moment to remind us of how little we know? And so, the question that hangs in the air, perhaps the most unsettling of all, is this: how much of our fundamental knowledge was truly discovered for the first time, and how much was simply remembered? Agriculture, astronomy, mathematics, architecture, did these arts spring from a human mind that was a blank slate, or were they seeds that sprouted from a soil that had been tilled before? Is our civilization an original creation or a reconstruction, an effort to assemble a complex puzzle with only a few of the pieces and without the picture on the box to guide us? If history has in fact been reset before, perhaps multiple times, what guarantees that our chapter will be the last? As we look at our own global civilization, with its powerful yet fragile technology and its delicate ecological balance, we are forced to see our own precariousness. The same forces that may have brought down past worlds, cosmic, climatic, social, are still at play. We are not immune to the laws of the cycle, if such laws exist. We are just the newest version, the latest wave to reach the shore. And the tide inevitably will eventually recede. If one day all that was left of us was a ring of dead satellites, orbiting a silent planet, or a thin layer of fossilized plastic in the rocks, what story would our ghosts tell? What would be our Antikythera mechanism, the one baffling piece of proof that we once dreamed and built and reached for the stars? Would it be the Voyager probe, drifting in the vastness of interstellar space, with its golden record of sounds and images, the last message in a bottle from a civilization the universe forgot? What enigma would we leave for the consciousness that came next? As the silence of the night enfolds us and sleep draws near, these questions remain, floating gently in the darkness. They do not ask for answers, only for contemplation. Are the myths memories? Is knowledge rediscovered? Are we in a cycle? And if one day all that is left of us is an echo, what melody will it sing? History is not a closed book, but an ocean of possibilities. And perhaps, just perhaps, we are not the first to have sailed its mysterious waters. Now rest, and listen for the echoes.